The streets of the city were almost empty that Christmas Eve. Snowflakes floated down gently, covering the sidewalks in a thin white blanket. Lights twinkled from houses and shops, and families hurried indoors carrying bags of food and gifts. Everywhere there was a feeling of warmth, except in the heart of one man who sat quietly inside a black car. His name was David, a man who had more money than he could ever spend. People in the city knew him as a successful businessman, someone who owned tall buildings and fine hotels. But very few knew about his private life. Behind the wealth, behind the strong image he showed to the world, he was just a lonely father trying to raise his little girl. Beside him on the back seat, his daughter Anna was sleeping softly, her small head leaning against the window. She was only 7 years old, full of life and laughter, yet tonight she was tired after helping her father prepare for the holiday. Earlier that evening, David had taken her shopping for Christmas gifts. He had bought her dolls, books, and even a sparkling dress. Still, when he looked at her peaceful face, something inside him felt heavy. Christmas used to be different. There used to be laughter, warmth, and the sweet smell of fresh cookies in his home. But that was when his wife was alive. Since her passing, Christmas had lost its magic. He tried to make the holiday bright for Anna, but in truth, it only reminded him of what was missing. As the car rolled slowly down the street, David's eyes wandered outside. He saw groups of people carrying cakes, couples holding hands, and children running with excitement. All of them seemed happy, surrounded by love. A sigh escaped his lips. He wondered if his money could ever buy that kind of happiness again. Just then, something unusual caught his eye. Near a small bakery that had already closed for the night, a woman was bent over, digging through a trash bin. The snow fell on her thin coat, and her hands trembled as she searched for something inside. She looked tired, cold, and completely alone. David's first thought was to drive past. This city had many people living on the streets, and he had seen scenes like this before. Yet, something about the woman made him pause. Maybe it was the way she tried to hide her face, or maybe it was the sadness in her posture. On this night, of all nights, the sight seemed unbearable. He slowed the car. His driver looked at him in surprise through the mirror. "Sir, shall I keep going?" the man asked. David shook his head. "Stop here." The car came to a halt near the bakery. David gently tapped his daughter's shoulder, whispering her name. Anna stirred but did not wake. He placed a warm blanket over her and stepped outside into the cold night. Snow crunched under his shoes as he walked toward the woman. She did not notice him at first. She was too busy searching the bin, moving aside paper bags and empty boxes. David felt a strange tightness in his chest as he watched. For a moment, he hesitated. He had never spoken to someone on the street like this. Would she be angry? Would she feel ashamed? Still, he could not turn away. Clearing his throat softly, he spoke in a gentle voice. "Excuse me, are you looking for food?" The woman froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Her face was thin, her cheeks red from the cold. Her hair was tucked under a worn scarf, and her eyes looked tired yet alert. For a moment, she seemed afraid to answer. Then, lowering her gaze, she nodded slightly. I haven't eaten today," she whispered, her voice rough from the winter air. David's heart sank. Around them, the city glowed with Christmas lights, but here stood a woman who had nothing, not even a warm meal. He could feel the sting of the cold on his own face, and he wondered how she had survived the long nights outside. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The woman hesitated again before answering. "Myra." "Myra," David repeated, almost to himself. The name sounded gentle, but her life at this moment seemed far from gentle. He took a small step closer, careful not to startle her. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" he asked. Her lips trembled as she shook her head. No. Not anymore. The simple words cut through him like a blade of sadness. David looked back at his car, where Anna was still sleeping warmly inside, wrapped in her blanket. Then he looked again at Myra, shivering in the cold, trying to find scraps from the trash. He felt torn. He was a man used to making business decisions worth millions, but this small moment felt heavier than any deal he had ever signed. Something deep inside told him that walking away would leave a mark on his heart he could never erase. David took a deep breath, his breath rising like mist in the frosty air. "It's Christmas Eve," he said quietly. "No one should be out here like this." Myra's eyes lifted slightly, uncertain, as if she could not believe someone like him was speaking to her. She hugged her thin coat around her body and whispered, "I'll be fine. Please don't worry." But David did worry. He could not help it. He did not yet know what he would do, but he knew one thing for certain: tonight, this woman's story had just entered his life. And somehow, he felt it was only the beginning. The night was still and quiet around the little bakery, broken only by the soft sound of snowflakes falling. David stood a few steps away from the woman who had just told him her name, Myra. She held herself tightly as if the thin coat on her back was the only shield she had against the cold world. David felt unsure of what to say next. His life was filled with meetings, numbers, and polished words, but here he was, struggling to find the right sentence for a stranger. Yet his heart whispered that he could not leave her like this. "Are you hungry?" he asked again, more gently this time. Myra lowered her gaze. Her voice came out quietly, almost carried away by the wind. "Yes. But I don't want to trouble you." David looked at her closely. Her hands were red from the cold, and her shoes were worn thin, not fit for the snow. Trouble, he thought, was not the right word. She wasn't trouble. She was a person in pain, and he had stopped because something in her touched his heart. "You're not troubling me," he said softly. "Please, let me help you." Myra gave a small, nervous smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "People don't usually stop," she whispered. "They look away, as if I am not even here." The words pressed on David's heart. He thought of his daughter, still sleeping warmly in the car, and imagined her out here alone in the cold. The thought made him shiver more than the winter air ever could. "Maybe most people don't stop," David admitted. "But tonight I did." For a moment, silence hung between them. The city lights sparkled on the snow, and somewhere far away, a church bell rang. Myra shifted slightly, unsure whether to trust him. She was used to being invisible, used to silence being safer than speaking. David cleared his throat gently. "Where are you staying tonight?" Her eyes flickered with sadness. "Nowhere. Some nights I find a place in the station or near a shelter, but they are full tonight." "It's Christmas." David nodded slowly. It was true. Shelters were often crowded during the holiday season, when cold was bitter and nights were long. He could see how fragile she looked, and the thought of her sleeping outside in the snow weighed heavily on him. "Listen," David said kindly, "I have some food at home. Why don't you come with me, just for tonight? You can have a warm meal." Myra's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "No. I can't. You don't know me. I can't accept that." David expected that answer, but he wasn't ready to give up. "You're right," he said calmly. "I don't know you. But sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it's enough to see someone in need and decide to help." His voice was steady, but inside he felt something unusual, like his late wife's spirit was urging him on. She had always believed in helping others, no matter who they were. Myra hugged her coat tighter. "I used to have a job," she said suddenly, almost as if she needed him to know she hadn't always been like this. "I worked in a small shop. But it closed, and I couldn't find another. My savings ended, and then, little by little, everything else went too. Her words trembled in the cold air. She wasn't asking for pity. She was simply telling the truth of how quickly life had changed. David listened carefully, his chest heavy with sympathy. He realized she was not begging, not asking him for money. She was simply trying to survive. That honesty touched him more than anything else. I believe you, David said gently. Life can be unfair. But tonight, you don't have to face it alone. Myra blinked, unsure how to respond. For months she had learned to live quietly, unnoticed. Now this man, a stranger, was offering her a small piece of hope. She wanted to say yes, but fear of disappointment held her back. David glanced toward his car. Anna was still asleep, her little face glowing under the warm light inside. He turned back to Myra. Come. My daughter is waiting. She will be happy to meet you. At the mention of a child, Myra's eyes softened. Something in her expression changed, as if the innocence of a child was harder to resist than the kindness of an adult. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, she whispered. But just for tonight. David smiled faintly, relieved. That's enough, he said. Together, they walked toward the car. Myra's steps were careful, as though she was unsure she deserved such kindness. When David opened the door, Anna stirred, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Papa, she asked in a soft, drowsy voice. David crouched beside her and stroked her hair. It's all right, Anna. This is Myra. She is going to join us tonight. Anna blinked, still half asleep, but her small lips curved into a gentle smile. Hello, she said, her voice innocent and kind. Myra felt her throat tighten. It had been so long since anyone had greeted her warmly. Hello, she whispered back, almost too softly to hear. As the car started moving again, David glanced at Myra. She was looking quietly out the window, her eyes following the lights of the city. He wondered what she was thinking, and whether she believed his invitation was real. David did not know what tomorrow would bring. But deep inside, he felt that meeting Myra on this cold Christmas Eve was not an accident. Something larger than chance had brought their paths together. And for the first time in years, he felt a small spark of meaning returning to his life. The car moved slowly through the snowy streets, carrying David, Anna, and now Myra. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the engine and the soft breathing of little Anna, who had drifted back to sleep. Myra sat carefully on the seat, holding her hands together on her lap. She kept glancing out the window, watching the lights of decorated houses and glowing Christmas trees pass by. The warmth of the car felt almost unreal to her. After so many nights spent in the cold, the simple heat of the vehicle made her eyes sting with tears she tried to hide. David sat across from her, watching quietly. He could sense her uneasiness. It was not easy for someone who had been ignored for so long to suddenly accept kindness. He wanted to say something to ease her heart, but he also didn't want to push her too much. Finally, Myra spoke, her voice gentle but unsure. You didn't have to stop for me. Most people, they don't even look. David shook his head. I know. But it didn't feel right to pass by. It's Christmas Eve, Myra. Tonight is supposed to be about hope, about being together. She lowered her gaze, as if his words touched something deep inside her. I used to love Christmas, she whispered. When I was younger, we decorated a small tree. My mother baked cookies, and the whole house smelled sweet. But now, her voice faded, and she pressed her lips tightly to stop them from trembling. David leaned slightly forward. Christmas can still be special. Sometimes it just takes one moment to feel it again. They fell into silence once more, but this time it felt softer, warmer. Myra's heart was quietly beginning to believe that maybe, for one night, she could belong somewhere again. At last, the car turned into a long driveway. Ahead stood a large but peaceful home, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. A decorated tree sparkled near the entrance, and gentle music floated out from inside. Myra stared at the house with wide eyes. It looked like something from a picture, a place where joy lived. She felt out of place, like a shadow standing at the door of brightness. When the car stopped, David stepped out first and helped Anna, who was half asleep. Then he turned to Myra and offered his hand politely. She hesitated, her pride and fear battling inside her, but slowly she placed her cold hand in his. "Welcome," he said softly. "Come inside." The warmth of the house wrapped around them as soon as they entered. The smell of pine from the tree filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of cinnamon. The living room glowed with soft lights, and a tall Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, decorated with ribbons, ornaments, and a shining star on top. Anna, now fully awake, rushed to the tree. "Papa, can we put the last decorations?" she asked excitedly. David smiled. "Of course. But this time, we have a guest to help us." He looked at Myra kindly. Myra froze. "Me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Anna said, holding out a box of small ornaments with her little hands. "Please, help me." Myra's throat tightened. It had been so long since anyone had invited her to join something simple and joyful. She took the box carefully, as if it were something precious. Together, Anna and Myra placed the ornaments on the tree. Anna chatted happily, telling stories about each decoration, how she had made one at school, how another had been her mother's favorite. Myra listened quietly, smiling at the child's innocent joy. For a moment, she almost forgot the cold streets outside, almost forgot her hunger and struggles. She felt warmth not just from the fire in the fireplace, but from something deeper. David watched them from a distance, his heart stirring in a way he hadn't felt for years. The sight of Myra and Anna decorating the tree together filled the house with life, something he had missed deeply since his wife's passing. He realized then that maybe this night was not only about helping Myra, it was also about healing something inside himself. After the tree was complete, they gathered around the dining table. David had asked his housekeeper earlier to prepare a simple but warm meal: roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a sweet cake. When the food was brought in, Myra stared at it in disbelief. She had not seen such a table in months. "Please, eat," David encouraged gently. At first, Myra was hesitant. She picked up small bites, afraid to seem greedy. But as Anna smiled at her and David nodded kindly, she let go of her hesitation and ate properly. Each bite warmed her body, each taste reminded her that she was still human, still deserving of dignity. Halfway through the meal, Anna looked at Myra with her innocent eyes and asked, "Do you like Christmas?" Myra paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Slowly, she smiled, though her eyes shone with tears. "I used to," she admitted softly. "And maybe tonight I can like it again." Anna reached across the table and held Myra's hand with her tiny fingers. "Then it's decided," she said cheerfully. "You are part of our Christmas." David's heart swelled at his daughter's words. He looked at Myra, who was blinking back tears, and he knew this night would change more than just her life. In that warm room, under the glowing lights of the Christmas tree, 3 people sat together: one little girl, her father, and a woman who thought she had lost everything. Yet somehow, on this Christmas Eve, they all found something new: hope, kindness, and the first spark of belonging. The house was quiet after dinner. The plates had been cleared, the tree stood glowing in the corner, and soft Christmas music played faintly from the old piano in the hallway. Little Anna had fallen asleep on the couch, her small hand resting on a pillow, her breathing slow and steady. David gently lifted her in his arms and carried her upstairs. He tucked her under her blankets, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Merry Christmas, my little star. She stirred but didn't wake, her lips curving into a peaceful smile. When David returned downstairs, he found Myra sitting near the fireplace. She had her hands folded on her lap, staring at the flames as if they carried memories. Her face looked calmer than when he first saw her by the trash bin, but her eyes still carried a weight that firelight could not erase. David poured 2 cups of tea and placed one on the small table beside her. She looked up in surprise. "Thank you," she said softly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. For a moment, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence, gentle but deep. David sat across from her, watching how the light played on her tired face. He felt an urge to know her story, yet he also feared it might be too painful to ask. Finally, Myra broke the silence. "This house, it feels alive," she said quietly. "It has warmth. I had almost forgotten what that felt like." David nodded slowly. "It hasn't always felt that way," he admitted. "For a long time, it was just walls and silence." Myra tilted her head, curious. "But you have your daughter. She seems full of joy." "She is," David agreed with a faint smile. "Anna is my light. She keeps me going." But, his eyes drifted toward the pictures on the mantelpiece. One frame in particular caught Myra's attention. It was a photo of a smiling woman holding a baby Anna in her arms. Myra understood without asking. Her voice softened. "Your wife?" David's chest tightened. He gave a small nod. "Yes. Her name was Claire. She passed away 5 years ago. Since then, Christmas has never been the same." Myra's eyes lowered, her fingers tightening around her teacup. She could hear the pain in his voice, a pain she recognized. "I'm sorry," she whispered. David took a slow breath, as though the memories pressed heavily on him. Claire loved Christmas. She would bake cookies with Anna, decorate every corner of the house, sing carols until the neighbors laughed. She made the season shine. When she was gone, the lights felt dim. "I tried to keep the traditions alive for Anna, but truthfully, most nights I just feel empty." The honesty in his words touched Myra deeply. He was a man who seemed strong to the world, yet here he was, sharing the cracks in his heart. Myra stared at the fire, her own memories flooding back. "I know what it means to lose everything," she said quietly. "I had no one left after my mother passed. My job kept me standing for a while, but when that went away, the rest of my life began to crumble too. At first, I thought I could manage, but slowly the world grew colder. People stopped seeing me. It was as if I disappeared, even while still alive." Her words trembled, but she kept her voice steady. She wasn't trying to gain pity, she was simply telling the truth. David listened carefully, his heart aching for her. "You didn't disappear," he said firmly. "You're still here. And tonight, you're not invisible." Myra blinked quickly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. It had been so long since anyone reminded her of her worth. For a few minutes, they both sat in silence again, letting the warmth of the fire comfort them. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of two souls recognizing each other's pain. Finally, David spoke softly, almost as if thinking aloud. "It's strange. I thought I was helping you tonight. But maybe you're helping me too." Myra looked at him with gentle surprise. "How could I help you?" "By reminding me," David said slowly, "that life is still shared. That even when we lose, we can still connect. Talking to you feels easier than I expected. You understand things most people don't." Her lips curved into a small, fragile smile. "Maybe that's because I know what it feels like to carry heavy memories." The fire popped softly, filling the space between them. For the first time in years, David felt like he wasn't speaking to the empty air. He was speaking to someone who truly listened, someone who understood the language of loss. The night grew deeper, but neither felt tired. They spoke of simple things: Myra's childhood Christmas tree, Anna's favorite bedtime stories, the little joys that still managed to exist even in dark times. Each word stitched a fragile thread of connection between them. At last, David leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "You know," he said, "tonight I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. The house doesn't feel empty." Myra's eyes softened. "Sometimes it only takes one night," she said quietly. "One moment of kindness, one honest conversation, and suddenly, the silence feels less heavy." David nodded. "You're right." For the first time in many Christmas Eves, the night did not feel cold inside his heart. He still carried his grief, and Myra still carried her struggles, but together in that warm living room, something new had begun, something fragile, yet real. As the firelight flickered on their faces, both David and Myra realized that opening their old wounds had not pushed them further into sadness. Instead, it had allowed them to breathe again, to remember that healing often begins with sharing. Morning sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, filling the room with golden light. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Little Anna was the first to wake. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and climbed out of bed, her feet padding softly across the carpet. It was Christmas morning, and excitement filled her heart. She ran to the living room where the Christmas tree stood tall and bright. Underneath, dozens of wrapped gifts waited with shiny ribbons and colorful paper. Anna gasped in delight, her face glowing with joy. But then, her eyes caught something else. On the couch, covered with a warm blanket, Myra was still sleeping. Her face looked peaceful, but her clothes reminded Anna of the night before. The child remembered how her papa had brought Myra in from the cold, how she had joined them for dinner and helped decorate the tree. Anna tiptoed closer, staring at her with innocent curiosity. She thought for a moment, then glanced at the pile of gifts under the tree. Most of them were for her, but Myra had none. A little frown formed on Anna's face. It didn't feel right. Quietly, she picked up a small package wrapped in red paper, a doll she had asked her papa to buy. Holding it carefully, she walked back to Myra. "Myra," Anna whispered, shaking her gently. "Wake up. It's Christmas." Myra stirred slowly, blinking her eyes open. At first, she looked confused, as though she had forgotten where she was. Then she saw Anna's smiling face and remembered everything. "Good morning," Myra said softly, her voice warm but a little shy. Anna grinned and held out the gift. "This is for you." Myra's eyes widened. "For me?" She sat up quickly, shaking her head. "Oh no, Anna, that's your present." "I can't take it." "But you don't have any," Anna said simply. "Everyone should have a gift on Christmas." Myra's lips trembled. She had gone many Christmases without a gift, but hearing those words from a child's heart touched her in a way nothing else could. Slowly, she accepted the small package, her fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Anna clapped her hands happily. "Open it." Myra carefully unwrapped the paper and gasped softly when she saw the little doll inside. It had bright eyes, a sweet smile, and a tiny red dress. She held it gently, as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. "It's beautiful," Myra said, her voice breaking. "I'll keep it forever." At that moment, David entered the room. He had been watching quietly from the doorway, and his heart swelled at the sight before him, his daughter giving away one of her own gifts without hesitation. He felt a deep pride in Anna, and at the same time, a quiet warmth seeing Myra's grateful smile. "Looks like Christmas is already full of surprises," David said gently, stepping forward. Myra looked up, embarrassed to be caught crying. She quickly wiped her eyes, but David shook his head kindly. "Don't hide your tears," he said softly. Sometimes they are proof that our hearts are still alive. Myra lowered her gaze, touched by his words. It's just, no one has given me a gift in years. I had forgotten what it felt like. Anna hugged her tiny shoulders and said cheerfully, now you remember. And next year, you'll get even more. David smiled, though inside his mind was already turning. He knew Myra could not simply go back to the streets. She deserved more than just one night of kindness. She needed time, safety, and a chance to start again. As they all sat together near the tree, opening gifts and sharing laughter, David quietly made a decision. When the morning joy settled, he turned to Myra. I'd like to make you an offer, he said gently. Myra blinked, unsure. An offer? Yes, David replied. I have a guest house on this property. It's warm, furnished, and empty. I'd like you to stay there for a while, until you find your feet again. Myra's eyes widened in shock. No. I couldn't. You've already done so much. I don't want to be a burden. David shook his head firmly. You are not a burden. You're a person who needs a chance. I can give you that. Please, let me help. Myra hesitated, her pride battling with her need. For so long she had survived alone, refusing to depend on anyone. But looking at David's steady eyes and Anna's hopeful smile, she realized this offer came from true sincerity, not pity. Slowly, she nodded. All right. But only for a short while. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. David smiled faintly. That's fair. A short while, until you're ready. Anna clapped her hands again. Yay. That means you'll be close to us. Myra laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. She had not laughed in months, and it felt strange but wonderful. Later that day, David showed her the guest house. It was a cozy little place near the garden, with a soft bed, a small kitchen, and warm light in every room. When Myra stepped inside, she stood silently for a moment, overcome with emotion. This feels like home, she whispered. David nodded. That's the point. Myra turned to him, her eyes shining. I don't know how to thank you. Just accept it, David said quietly. Sometimes the best way to thank someone is simply to live again. That night, as Myra lay in the warm bed of the guest house, hugging the doll Anna had given her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And for David, watching the lights of the guest house glow from his window, he too felt something new stirring in his heart, the belief that kindness could change more than just one life. Days turned into weeks, and the heavy snow slowly began to melt. Winter still held the town in its grip, but inside David's home and the small guest house, life began to feel different. What started as a single night of kindness had slowly grown into something more. Myra now lived in the guest house, and though she was still shy about accepting help, she tried every day to show her gratitude. She cooked simple meals, helped in the garden when the snow allowed, and sometimes read stories to Anna. For the first time in years, she felt useful again. David watched these small changes with quiet relief. When he had first met Myra, she had looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. Now, her face showed traces of peace. She still had struggles, but she was standing again, step by step. One evening, while David worked in his study, Anna came running in with bright eyes. "Papa," she exclaimed. "Myra taught me how to bake cookies today. Just like Mama used to." David looked up, his heart tightening. The mention of his late wife always brought both warmth and ache. "Really?" he asked gently. "Yes." Anna nodded eagerly. "They are in the kitchen. Come taste them." David followed her and found Myra taking a tray out of the oven. The smell of fresh cookies filled the room, sweet and comforting. For a moment, David was taken back in time, back to when Claire, his wife, had baked with Anna, laughter filling the house. "Would you like one?" Myra asked, offering a cookie with a small smile. David accepted it and took a bite. It was simple, not perfect, but somehow it tasted better than anything he had eaten in years. It carried with it not just sweetness, but also effort, care, and a touch of hope. "They're wonderful," he said softly. Myra's cheeks warmed with quiet pride. It had been a long time since anyone praised something she had done. Over the next weeks, Myra slowly began to rebuild her life. With David's encouragement, she applied for small jobs around town. It wasn't easy, many doors had been closed to her in the past, but this time, she felt stronger. Soon, she found work at a little bookstore. The first day she came home from her new job, Anna ran to her. "How was it? Did you sell lots of books?" Myra laughed, brushing snow from her hair. "I didn't sell many today, but I organized shelves and read to a little boy while his mother shopped. It felt good." David, who stood nearby, felt something stir inside him. He saw how Anna glowed around Myra, and how Myra's presence filled the house with warmth again. But deep down, he also felt uncertain. What would happen when Myra grew stronger and decided to leave? Would the house return to silence once more? The thought unsettled him, though he kept it hidden behind a calm smile. One Saturday afternoon, they all went together to the town square, where children were building snowmen. Anna tugged at Myra's hand, begging her to help. Myra laughed and knelt in the snow, rolling a ball of snow while Anna placed buttons and a scarf. David stood a little away, watching them. For the first time in many years, he saw his daughter's laughter shining without shadows. And for the first time, he saw Myra laughing too, genuine laughter, free and unforced. "Papa!" Anna called. "Come help us with the snowman's hat." David joined them, and together the three placed an old hat on top of the snowman. When they stepped back, Anna clapped in delight. "It's perfect." David looked at the snowman, but his eyes lingered on Myra. She looked different from the woman he had found digging through trash weeks ago. Her eyes had light again, her smile was softer, and her step seemed steadier. That night, after Anna had gone to bed, David and Myra sat near the fire again. The warmth of the flames flickered on their faces. "You've come a long way," David said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Myra lowered her gaze, touched by his words. "I couldn't have done it without you. If you hadn't stopped that night, I don't know where I'd be." David shook his head. "You're the one who found the strength to stand again. I only opened a door. You chose to walk through it." Myra smiled faintly. "Still, you gave me a chance when no one else would. That means everything." For a long moment, they sat in silence. The fire crackled softly, and outside, snowflakes drifted under the moonlight. David wanted to say more about how her presence had changed his home, about how Anna's laughter had returned, about how even his own heart felt lighter. But the words stayed inside, waiting for their time. Meanwhile, Myra's heart was also full. She had once thought she would never belong anywhere again. But here, with David and Anna, she felt something new, a small but steady sense of family. She knew she couldn't stay forever, but for now, she was grateful for every moment. And so, as winter slowly turned toward spring, their days settled into a gentle rhythm. Anna had someone to laugh with. Myra had a place to rest her head. And David, though still carrying his old wounds, began to believe in second chances. The journey wasn't finished, but one thing was clear: hope had returned. Spring sunlight streamed gently through the windows of David's home. The snow had melted, and fresh green leaves began to cover the trees. The whole town seemed brighter, filled with a sense of renewal. Inside the house, however, David carried a quiet unease in his heart. Myra had been living with them for several months now. She had found work at the bookstore, made friends in the neighborhood, and earned respect for her kindness and honesty. People no longer looked at her as a stranger or someone to pity. They saw her strength. David was proud of her, but he also feared what might come next. What if she decided to leave and build her own life elsewhere? The thought of returning to an empty house without her laughter, without Anna's joy, troubled him deeply. One evening, as they sat near the fireplace, David finally asked, "Myra, have you thought about what you want for your future?" Myra hesitated. She held a warm cup of tea in her hands, staring at the firelight. "Every day," she admitted softly. "For a long time, I thought my future was gone. I believed I would never have a place again. But being here, it gave me something I didn't expect." David leaned closer, his voice gentle. "And what is that?" She lifted her eyes to him, and for a moment, her words caught in her throat. But then she whispered, "A family. A home. A reason to believe again." The simplicity of her words struck David deeply. He realized he had been waiting to hear something like this. His chest felt both heavy and light at the same time. Before he could respond, Anna came running into the room, carrying a small drawing she had made. "Papa! Myra! Look, I drew us together." On the paper, there were 3 figures holding hands: David, Anna, and Myra. Above them was a small house with flowers by the window. David's throat tightened as he looked at the picture. Myra's hand trembled slightly as she held it. "It's beautiful," Myra said, her voice thick with emotion. Anna beamed. "This is our family now." "Right, Papa." David looked at Myra. For a long time, silence filled the room. Myra's eyes shone with tears, but she gave a small, almost trembling nod. "Yes," David said at last, his voice steady. "Our family." From that day, something shifted between them. They didn't need to speak about it every day, but the feeling was there, unspoken, yet real. They shared meals, laughter, and the simple joys of life. Still, Myra knew she had to be honest. One quiet morning, as the sun painted the sky gold, she told David the truth. "When you found me that night," she began, her tone soft but clear, "I had lost everything. I was tired, and I had no hope left. I didn't believe anyone would see me as human again. But you stopped. You didn't walk past me. You gave me warmth when I thought the world had turned cold. That's something I will never forget." David's eyes softened. "Myra," she shook her head gently, not letting him interrupt. "I want you to know that what you gave me was more than food, more than a roof. You gave me dignity again. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. And what you said, what you did, it saved me." David swallowed hard, his heart full. For weeks, he had wondered what she truly felt, whether she only stayed because she needed help. But now, hearing her words, he understood the truth. Anna, who had been listening quietly nearby, ran forward and hugged Myra tightly. "Don't ever leave us," she whispered. Myra's tears fell freely as she hugged the little girl back. "I don't want to leave," she promised. David stood and walked closer. His voice was low, but filled with certainty. "Myra, you don't have to. This house was once only walls and silence. But now it's alive again. Because of you. Stay. Not as a guest, not as someone passing by, but as part of this family." Myra looked up at him, her face shining with both surprise and gratitude. "Are you sure?" David nodded. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." There was no grand gesture, no need for more words. The warmth in their hearts spoke louder than anything else. From then on, life moved forward in a new way. David continued to manage his work, but he no longer carried his burdens alone. Myra, with her gentle strength, filled the house with kindness. Anna grew with joy, knowing she was surrounded by love from both of them. They weren't perfect. There were days of struggle, moments of doubt, times when the past whispered its sadness. But together, they faced it all. And every evening, as they sat near the fire, they remembered how far they had come. On the next Christmas Eve 1 year since that night when David had first seen Myra searching through trash, they sat together by the tree. Anna placed a small star on top and clapped her hands. "This is the best Christmas," she said. Myra smiled. "Yes, the best." David looked at them both, his heart full. He thought about that night, how one act of kindness had changed everything. And then, as he held both Anna's and Myra's hands, he realized the truth: the miracle of Christmas was not in gifts or wealth, but in what she had said that night. "You gave me hope again." Those words stayed with him forever, a reminder that even the smallest kindness could bring light to the darkest places. And so, their story was not one of loss anymore, but of finding family, healing, and love when it was least expected.